This week, Tulsi Gabbard drops a major bombshell on the former Obama administration. A TV institution gets canceled. Our panel reacts. And President Trump's first 6 months in office. Our Washington correspondent for The Lion was at the White House and in the middle of all the coverage. These stories and much more straight ahead this week on The Lion Week in Review. Welcome into this week's edition of The Lion Week in Review. It's a weekly look at the culture, the courts, your state capitol, and your kids. I'm Chris Stigall. Now, let's meet our panel, the men and women behind the stories. You read it, readlion.com. Melissa Oden is host of Life Beyond Abortion, part of our podcast network here at the Herzog Foundation. Josh Mann, managing editor. Michael Ryan contributes and is a fantastic columnist at a couple of different publications we're going to highlight today here, by the way, on The Lion, because the man is busy. We all hold multiple jobs at 2025, so let's get right into it, panel, as we discuss. Let's start, if you would, Josh, with the story of the week, and we're going to talk about this a little later in the show. We've got some audio of Tulsi Gabbard, DNI, and drops a big bombshell, a couple of them, Friday of last week, Monday into this week. Where are we going with this story?
Well, nearly every American has heard this story that Russia helped Trump win the 2016 election, but that has been proven false. Of course, Trump has said it's a hoax. He's claimed that. But Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard just released evidence that alleges that this whole thing was staged and directed by President Barack Obama before he left office using phony, bespoke intelligence assessments. Now, if that's true, I mean, this is a huge scandal. So this cannot be easily ignored. This must be dealt with. It must be investigated. I'm open to questions, but so far the legacy media appears to be trying to defend the former president and not take this seriously.
It's an interesting, I was pointing out earlier in the week, Michael, that it's they're kind of using two different storylines. The first one being, well, they reported that Russia did tamper with the elections, but it didn't have any impact. And, you know, it's like trying to have it both ways, depending on which assertion you're coming at, that there was never any real meddling, or yes, there was meddling, but it wasn't particularly meaningful. I know you've been writing about it, not just at readline.com, but also over at the Heartlander.
Yeah, I wrote a column about the media's actions here on heartlandernews.com. And silly me, I thought the media had two choices with this. One, you could express outrage if you were duped as a media outlet by the Obama administration and start reporting the truth. Or two, you could remain silent and just let people assume that you're a co-conspirator in the hoax. But apparently there's two other options. One is to just ignore it completely, which some media outlets are doing. And the fourth, is to tell people to deny their lying eyes because it's just not true. It's not even believable. A CNN reporter on allegations against Obama said, quote, "This is hardly information we should be repeating." That's shocking, appalling, and frightening that a major news outlet would just dismiss the scandal of the century, and basically the scandal, the biggest in U.S. history. The news media won't cover this fairly. It's the biggest scandal in U.S. history because it doesn't fit the narrative.
The problem is, of course, for the better part of President Trump's first term, impeachments were based on this storyline, investigations, people lost jobs, people were jailed, people were spied upon, based on an assertion, Josh, you understand, based on the assertion that President Trump was colluding with Russia, even though they knew better before he was even sworn in.
That's right. And I remember thinking, well, okay, yeah, it sounds like Russia supported Trump. I mean, I didn't think twice about it. Although I didn't agree with, the sort of the prosecutions that took place and all the other things that went along with it. But, Gabbard is giving receipts. She's showing things, releasing documents. I thought at the press conference yesterday, that was the first time I had seen her in front of reporters taking questions on this matter. You could tell a lot of the reporters were already starting to kind of couch the narrative. Are you trying to save your reputation with the president? And she actually repeatedly encouraged them, simply look at the documents that I've released. She wasn't there to defend herself, it seemed to me, and she just wanted to show them, get them to look at the evidence.
And I don't know where this goes, if it goes very far at all, but a lot of legal scholars differ, Michael, on, and we'll talk a little about this a little later in the show, and our own Maggie Little was at the White House when all of this was popping. We'll check in with her as well. But, Michael, you're kind of shorthand on where you think this goes. Some differ on whether charges can be brought, and against whom, if so.
Well, there's two things among conservatives on my X feed. One is that arrests must happen. Two is that arrests won't happen. So there's a lot of cynicism among conservatives about Republicans' ability to follow through and actually take people to court on this. I think one of the interesting theories online and reported by John Solomon at Just the News is that although the statute of limitations has run on some of these alleged offenses, you can overcome that by tying it to a grand conspiracy that goes through years and years, including 2024. So we'll have to see whether that's the road that the Trump administration or the DOJ goes down.
But it wasn't all heavy. This week was also a big celebration for President Trump, marking officially the 6-month mark. Melissa, let's bring you in here. 6 months, I think it's probably pretty safe to say, compared to his first term, lots more has happened in a much faster pace.
Really exciting. I love that they're calling it a victory lap, although I would say it's probably a warm-up jog. I think they need to continue to stretch and be ready for, what the 6 months and the rest of the administration looks like. But, I love that here we are, Democrats are tearing themselves apart, and the president is bringing people together around results. And to me, they've called him divisive all this time, and what he's showing is that he's not being divisive. He's providing incredible direction.
And bottom line, when you look at the totality of the 6 months here, Michael, what would you say is the biggest accomplishment of President Trump's thus far, in your view?
Well, I think probably the secure border is the most important, to stop the bleeding, and then moving to deport very dangerous people. But I mean, choose one. I mean, the inflation has been killed. You got historic trade deals that are going to pay off for years and years. You got new investments, hundreds of billions of dollars of foreign investments in the U.S. that he's gotten pledged to, and the first government surplus in June since 2001.
That's pretty amazing. Josh, not to be left out is what we've talked about here a lot, and that's tackling the Department of Education. We may decentralize education once and for all.
Yeah, that's right. And we're just hearing that there might be another bill to claw back money that the federal government has already approved, this time to education. We do know that there were some summer funds expected in public education, that some of which were just released for some after-school programs. That was about $1.3 billion, but there's about another $7 billion, as I understand it, out on the table that's for teacher training, migrant student training, and preschool, that a lot of critics say there's a lot of indoctrination tied up with those things. And so I wonder if that's some of that money that the administration hopes to claw back.
At Readline.com, all of these stories, so much more. There's important stuff that maybe you don't always read in mainstream media, and that's why Readline.com is so important. And Michael has written an important one on the persecution of Christians worldwide. This is not stuff you'll find at a lot of mainstream media outlets, Michael.
No, because it doesn't fit another narrative of the left, which is Christian persecution. Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri teamed up with Congressman Riley Moore from West Virginia to propose a resolution in Congress denouncing, condemning Christian persecution throughout the world. Hawley and Moore cite 50,000 Christians in Nigeria alone that have been slaughtered in religious ethnic cleansing. And again, it doesn't fit the narrative. A few years ago, the Hollywood elite were all at Twitter about the Chinese crackdown on the Uyghurs, is a Muslim ethnic population there. But I'm wondering, how about this? I mean, get a lot of Christians in this country. I asked Hawley if he can do more than condemn, and he has a practical solution. And that is, first step, you start defunding some of these countries that are doing this. So you don't send foreign aid to any country that is in any way persecuting Christians.
Melissa, the Supreme Court continues to tackle the issue of life, abortion across the country. It is certainly your wheelhouse. It's something you cover and follow quite a bit on your own podcasts. Where do things stand right now at the High Court?
Well, interestingly enough, we see that blue states are going after pregnancy centers time and time again. And I think I would, call this the one aisle subpoena syndrome. They continue to attack pregnancy centers over everything you can imagine. And this is not about protecting consumers. This is about them attempting to control pro-life impact.
Josh also wanted to get in here before we head to Maggie in Washington, D.C. We've got a packed show today. The MAHA movement. This is one that's also part of the 6 months of Trump. A lot of people talking about that move to make everybody healthy. And, in fact, it hasn't taken a bit of legislation to get it done.
That's right. Congress has not had to act. RFK, though, has been very effective. Trump has supported this effort as well. They created a MAHA Commission on Chronic Childhood Diseases. It's already released a report. They're cracking down on harmful ingredients in foods. Companies are proactively making their foods or products better, just with a little bit of pressure from the administration. Coca-Cola famously is sort of preemptively changing their ingredients or committing to using a more healthy version of sugar. And so we're seeing very effective use of pressure, also regulatory powers. And, it's also an area I think it's important to note that there's a lot of consensus here. Even though RFK, they tried to sort of make people worried about his stance on vaccines and other things, but what we're seeing is there's a lot of consensus around the things he's doing, promoting. I think people understand we're an unhealthy nation. We need to get healthy again, and we need to look at these conflicts of interest with pharmaceuticals.
Panel, thanks. Now we're going to head to Washington, D.C., where one of the newest members of our team at readlion.com is now regularly embedded inside the White House and traveling with the President of the United States, Maggie Little. Hey, Maggie, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Got another big exclusive brought into the White House it's a busy week. I know you were brought there for a head of state visit, among other things, but there's a lot popping. Let's talk about your visit to the White House again this week.
Yeah, sure. So it was the Lions Day, being in the pool, which is, we're just one of the select group of reporters that day to keep tabs on President Trump. And, they brought us into the Oval Office as he had a bilateral meeting with the Philippines president, talking, right before they made a big trade deal yesterday. So we were there. There were a ton of reporters with us from the Philippines as well who had come into town for it. And then later that night, he opened up an event to the press that was in the East Room. It was a reception that he had with Republican members of Congress, and there were some cabinet officials there. So we were just tracking his movements throughout the day.
Also going on this week simultaneously, and I, being that you're kind of hanging out with the media set there, I'm curious, was there much discussion about the two other huge items that have been just constant and perpetual in the news? Tulsi Gabbard's release of information as DNI and the Obama-Russia gate, some are calling it, that as well as the Epstein stuff. It seems like all of that is swirling all at the same time. What are you hearing, if anything, there?
It's pretty much all everyone's talking about here in DC. Actually, last night at the reception, Tulsi Gabbard was in attendance. So President Trump was, calling her out. He said he was complimenting her for releasing those files. And of course, the Epstein questions are just constant. When we were in the Oval Office, there were several reporters asking him questions about it, but he had a lot of other issues that he was trying to talk about as well.
Do you get the sense?
But
could I ask
definitely
you
does not seem the stories going by.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I'm just curious. Do you get the sense, because many obviously are suggesting this White House is trying to drive the conversation in a different direction because they don't want to talk about Epstein? You and I were talking before we started this interview that the Wall Street Journal correspondent will not be allowed to travel to Scotland with the press pool because of the piece they wrote last week. Trump didn't like that. Do you get the sense the White House is trying to avoid the Epstein discussion or distract, or no?
Going into it, I thought maybe that was the case, but he did answer the question and kind of talked about it for several minutes yesterday, but then he kind of switched the topic to Obama and that story. So it's a little hard to tell. Obviously, the questions haven't gone away. I think it's been over 2 weeks now. So they have been addressing it, but there's a lot of chatter just among reporters in general, I think, right now about what's actually going on here. So it's it's a little hard to tell. I think everyone has questions about both stories still.
What's your understanding about what needs to be released or what can be released? I mean, from what I understand, and I'm just sincerely kind of a blank slate about it, the president has said to the Attorney General Bondi, ask a judge to release everything. Is that about where it stands? I'm not under the impression that President Trump wants to sit on anything. Are you?
That's my impression as well. Yeah, it's not something that I've personally been reporting on, but I've been following it, of course. My understanding is that he said, release what you have, just get it out there.
All right. I would also love to, and by the way, congratulations on the great coverage again. And I know here and there you'll be called in to the White House. And I was talking with your colleague, Josh Mann, who joins us here on the panel in a bit. He said the thing about your invite here again is this White House's commitment to bringing in new voices and new media and access and talking. They're not hiding. I mean, you can't accuse them of hiding from the media, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think just because we have this access, they restored a lot of people's credentials that had been taken away under the Biden administration, as well as bringing in even more new voices. I see one of my jobs as new media is to sometimes cover things that I don't see mainstream outlets always covering, whether that be just when we were at the Pittsburgh rally trying to just get a look at the crowd size, because you don't always see that covered when it comes to President Trump's rallies, or whether it's asking questions that he maybe won't be asked about. Last time that I was in the Oval Office before yesterday, I asked about the military parade, which even though it was happening that week and it was going to be a huge event, he hadn't had really many questions about it yet. So I think it's awesome having the access, and it's part of our job is to ask questions that we don't really hear being asked.
Also at readlion.com, Maggie, this week you had a story, and this is interesting because this week the news came that President Trump's next rescission bill will target the Department of Education specifically. We know a lot of teachers' unions have real issue with the federal government's shrinking role in education, but this goes all the way down to the state level too. And as school choice continues to grow at the state level, teachers' unions, specifically in Missouri, your story focuses on, are fighting.
Yeah, so the teachers union in Missouri just filed a lawsuit. They're upset about the fact that the state allocated $51 million towards the school choice program, MO Scholars, which gives families, also including families with students with low income or disabilities, they give them scholarships to be able to attend different various K through 12 schools. And so we wrote on that lawsuit, and some of the unseen part of that story is that there are thousands of families that are on the wait list. The Children's Education Association of Missouri says that they have thousands of families who have been waiting for years to get one of these scholarships. This money from the state budget would increase the scholarship amount by about 7,000 new scholarships. And so if this lawsuit, we're going to be watching it play out, because if it holds up that funding, there's going to be a lot of families that are going to have to keep waiting.
Yeah, and the Mo Scholars program, we know a little about it here at the Herzog Foundation. We're pretty intimately involved with that. That is funded largely by taxpayers in the state of Missouri. They can allocate up to half of their tax liability that they pay to the state. They can send half of their state tax liability to the Mo Scholars program to fund scholarships for kids to get them out of troubled schools. Specifically, the teachers union is suing on what grounds?
They say that it's unconstitutional. Their argument is essentially that under the original law creating the program, that the government wasn't supposed to directly fund it, like with an allocation, and that it has to be through private donors instead. So it's going to be interesting to see what the court has to say about that.
The legislature upping the money contributed to the fund. The teachers union is challenging, saying that wasn't part of the deal.
Yes.
And that heads to who decides that? Do you know? I'm never really great with the courts. Does that happen? Does that stay in a Missouri court first?
It's in Missouri for now. Yes.
Yeah, that'll be interesting, and I'm sure they'll fight all the way up. Maggie Little, this is Steph. The coverage just from not just the White House, but stories all over in various states. We cover it all at readlion.com. And Maggie, one of the newest members of the team. So good to talk to you, Maggie. Great work, yes. And we'll see you again soon.
All right, you as well. Thanks.
Welcome back to the Lion Week in Review. If you missed any of today's show or you'd like to get refreshed on any of the previous shows, you can always catch us on YouTube, and all the stories, of course, at readlion.com. Back with our panel, Melissa, Josh, and Michael. Let's head to some of the video from the week. We were talking about it earlier. Tulsi Gabbard dropping, this is the second of the big bombshells, really, Friday, and then again on what would have been Wednesday of this week. Take a listen.
There's irrefutable evidence that detail how President Obama and his national security team directed the creation of an intelligence community assessment that they knew was false. They knew it would promote this contrived narrative that Russia interfered in the 2016 election to help President Trump win, selling it to the American people as though it were true. it wasn't. The report that we released today shows in great detail how they carried this out. They manufactured findings from shoddy sources. They suppressed evidence and credible intelligence that disproved their false claims. They disobeyed traditional tradecraft intelligence community standards and withheld the truth from the American people. In doing so, they conspired to subvert the will of the American people who elected Donald Trump in that election in November of 2016. They worked with their partners in the media to promote this lie, ultimately to undermine the legitimacy of President Trump and launching what would be a years-long coup against him and his administration. We're here today because the American people deserve the truth, they deserve accountability, and they deserve justice.
Now, Michael, we spent a lot of time off the top of the show talking about this, but I would just add that this is notable because she was the former vice chair of the Democrat Party. It's a big deal, and I don't think she's bluffing. I mean, if anybody's serious about Tulsi Gabbard, anyway.
No, she's not, and she doesn't get any credit for being a former Democrat, that's for sure. You know, when you throw out stuff like intelligence community assessments, that sounds really involved and confusing. It's pretty simple. I think it was December 8th of 2016, there was a presidential briefing that said, no, Russia didn't do this. The next day, December 9th, Obama ordered up an intelligence community assessment that said the opposite. And they manufactured it out of whole cloth using, by the way, the totally debunked Steele dossier, which they knew was debunked, as the basis for it. And then that became the basis for the Mueller investigation and everything. And what Tulsi calls a years-long coup against Trump, manufactured intelligence. And the truth is, Russia had dirt on Hillary that they chose not to use before the election. I wonder why.
We're in the media business, so I'll admit there's a bit of navel-gazing and self-interest when I watch what we're about to watch here, but there have been a series of news stories related to public broadcasting, NPR, PBS, and now, as of this week, Stephen Colbert and CBS are parting ways, and the announcement that CBS is not only doing away with Stephen Colbert's iteration of The Late Show, they're doing away with the format altogether. Out have trotted many of the different heads and former heads of public broadcasting to comment on this, and they're being defunded by the taxpayer dollar at the congressional level. We'll start first with Vivian Schiller, former NPR chief, commenting on Colbert specifically.
This has not been a great week for free speech and speaking truth to power, without a doubt. Look, the circumstantial evidence, and that's all we have, is as follows. CBS has said that they are canceling Stephen Colbert after next season for financial reasons. At the same time, we also know, as you said in the intro, that it is the #1 show in its time slot. And we also know that the new parent company for CBS, or they hope to be the new parent company, has spent money on other things. So it's very curious. And we have to also make note that Stephen Colbert is unafraid to, again, speak truth to power. He does it in a very bipartisan way over the years.
Wow, I don't know what show she watches, but anyway, Molly Jong-Fast also took a swing at it from the New York Times and ratcheted up the rhetoric.
So you wrote about this, and you say Colbert's cancellation, simply not funny.
Yes, simply not funny, but also really scary, right? And even if it's not quid pro quo, the idea of self-censorship, and I talk about my grandfather Howard Fast, who was jailed by McCarthy during the House on Un-American Activities, that our government has done this before, that history is very much filled with moments like this. And I think it's important that we take a 20,000-foot view of it because of that, because there are ways to come back from government misuse of power like this.
But interestingly, over at CBS, the very network that made this announcement this week, one of the morning hosts, I don't know if he got a little prickly about the assertion that CBS was part of some Trump conspiracy to silence voices, but he'd had enough, and there was some odd truth being spilled on the CBS network this week.
He's not right that the merger, the $8 billion, is based on reruns of a comedy show. No, people are buying the movies and the sitcoms and the sports. They're not based on reruns of us either. So I think they're wrong about that.
He's saying that it contributed to it.
It's all encompassing. It's a whole package of it. That already happened in the past. And he also acknowledged that these late night shows are what he called like a blockbuster kiosk inside a tower record. So the business is broken. And what no one seems to acknowledge is that the politics also changed. The business changed and so did the politics. And it got way more one-sided than anything Johnny Carson was ever doing.
Wow, you could have knocked me over with a feather, Michael. That's a CBS News anchor.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting to me. This guy was offensive to half the country and losing $40 million a year, apparently. And this is about free speech? No, I don't think so. I think $40 million is not free. And nobody complained about, killing free speech by canceling, I don't know, a sitcom.
Josh, $100 million budget to put this show on. As Michael pointed out, $40 million loss. The business model, as that anchor on CBS just said, it's just an unsustainable business model. Media is changing, and the country's politics changed.
And I think it's telling that they're saying that they're doing away with the format. They're not going to have a late show in the same way. And so I think, we'll see how it plays out. I just can't help but think where we were at a year ago in terms of censorship from the government and where some of these same folks were when we were actually very concerned about what we were seeing the government do. Certainly, you've got the government funding public television and radio. That doesn't sound like free speech, actually. That sounds like government-funded speech. Melissa,
does anyone get their news and information from Stephen Colbert? Sincere question, even if they're left of center. The assertion from some of these news people at NPR and New York Times is that he's some sort of vestige of truth-telling and news people desperately need, like he was providing a service.
Right. This whole, speak truth to power kind of situation. My kids wouldn't even know who Stephen Colbert is, for starters. But, I think this is so fascinating because we want to be told somehow that Obama didn't collude about anything regarding President Trump and Russia, but yet the Trump administration is responsible for Colbert being, his program being ended and canceled. This is ridiculous.
One more before we close. This is more just, what do you want to say, a palate cleanser for the day, is the Hunter Biden sit-downs. He's granting interviews. This particular one comes from a guy called Andrew Callahan and his podcast. Take a listen.
Opinions, but him, and everybody around him. I don't have to be nice. Number one, I agree with Quentin Tarantino. George Clooney is not a actor. He is a I don't know what he is. He's a brand. And by the way, and God bless him. You know what? He supposedly treats his friends really well. You know what I mean? Buys them things. And he's got a really great place in Lake Como. And he's great friends with Barack Obama. You, what do you have to do with anything? Why do I have to listen to you? What right do you have to step on a man who's given 52 years of his life to the service of this country and decide that you, George Clooney, are going to take out basically a full-page ad in the New York Times to me and James Carville, who hasn't run a race in 40 years, and David Axelrod, who had one success in his political life, and that was Barack Obama. And that was because of Barack Obama, not because of David Axelrod.
So, Michael, I guess the voice that everyone was waiting for, Hunter Biden, he's taking a shot at some pretty sacred cows in the Democrat Party. I'll give him that.
Oh, what a great statesman. He talks a lot like President Camacho from Idiocracy. If you know, you know. He's not the face of the party, but maybe he can be the voice of the party.
It is interesting, Josh. There is some authenticity in him. You got to give him that.
Yeah, he's being honest. He sounds a lot like his dad. I can't help but notice. He's got a lot to be upset about, and I don't completely blame him. But the party right now is really in a mess, and so it'll be just interesting to watch how they respond and what happens from here.
Could I just suggest for him Ambien?
Panel, thank you. We'll leave it there. When we get back, Faith and Freedom 250, our special series continues.
The American Revolution did not happen overnight or by accident. History teaches us the long list of laws and restrictions Great Britain imposed on the colonies following the 7 Years' War that led up to open rebellion by 1775. But the seeds of independence were sown a generation earlier in a great religious movement called the Great Awakening.
The Great Awakening began in the colonies in the 1730s and took root quickly. It was a direct response to Europe's Age of Enlightenment, which sought to ground religion in science and reason. The religious fervor of Great Awakening ministers brought spiritual matters back into focus and challenged the long-held authority of the established clergy. Itinerant ministers traveled from village to village, preaching the doctrines of the Great Awakening. More than just rational instruction of religious principles, they reached their audiences in emotional, often electrifying ways. This new style was a dramatic shift from the pious, authoritarian preaching of the state-sanctioned Church of England and even from Congregationalist clergy.
Preaching the need for Christians to be born again, the Great Awakening put the focus of salvation on the individual. It was no longer under the control of an ordained elite. The movement caught fire up and down the eastern seaboard, crossing class lines and shaking the status quo. Historians estimate that as much as 80% of colonists were directly exposed to the New Light preachers who touted the new birth of salvation. The Old Lights bristled at the revolutionary notion that salvation was primarily between God and the individual. Meanwhile, new denominations like the Methodists and Baptists surged in numbers as they filled open-air revivals.
Preachers on both sides of the Atlantic like Jonathan Edwards, George Whitefield, and James Davenport became some of the first true celebrities in the New World. Jonathan Edwards' sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, delivered in 1741, became one of the most widely read religious texts outside the Bible. Thousands gathered to hear these New Light preachers as they traveled from town to town, often unwelcome by the established clergy, spreading their message with urgency and passion. John Wesley, founder of the Methodist Church, played a key role in the movement, preaching salvation and the case for human sinfulness. He appointed hundreds of missionaries to spread the gospel to the New World.
The movement lasted from the 1730s through the 1770s, right as the Revolution was gaining steam. The religious fervor and the intolerable actions of a parliament and king thousands of miles away were about to collide. If individuals could experience salvation based on a personal relationship with God, why couldn't they question their relationship with their government as individuals too?
If the blessing of sanctioned ministers wasn't necessary to go to heaven, were monarchs and nobles necessary for earthly happiness? If a colonist and their family could live, work, pray, and do good without elite approval, why couldn't they make their own laws, levy their own taxes, and defend their own freedom? The Great Awakening shattered the idea that a privileged few controlled the path to prosperity or eternity. Even the Old Lights couldn't ignore its impact. Their thinking, and society's thinking, was being transformed.
The Great Awakening wasn't just a religious revival, it lit the fuse for something bigger, a widespread desire for personal autonomy and civic responsibility. It stirred a longing for independence in every corner of life.
The men who convened for the first two Continental Congresses were steeped in what the Great Awakening taught. They had all come of age in this time period. There was a healthy mix of old lights and new lights who gathered in Philadelphia. The issues they debated, the steps they took, and the documents they signed all placed personal responsibility for their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor squarely in their own hands, following a central tenet of the Great Awakening teachings. By applying religious principles to civil matters, they tore the reins of governance from the old authorities and placed them into the hands of the people. The preachers who challenged established powers may not have lived to see the temporal fruits of their efforts, but their message laid the philosophical groundwork for the American founding.